All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive. The show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to get fantastical. And by that, I mean we're going to be covering a few of the new races from Monsters of the Multiverse. I mentioned in my review of Monsters on the Multiverse, which if you haven't seen it, you should probably go check it out, that instead of just collecting all of these different races from a bunch of different books, they actually made quite a few kind of adjustments to the races, and I think they make them significantly more interesting to play. Now, not every single race has had massive adjustments or really any adjustments versus some of them, but there's enough here that I think it warrants us taking a look, just because, again, there are a lot of choices that you can make using these, and again, the whole purpose of D&D Deep Dive is to ensure that you get the most out of your choices. So, let's just dive into this. We're going to just go alphabetically because that's how they have it in the book. And I'm thinking we will probably do like 3 to 5 races per episode. I don't want these being massive long episodes, so I'll kind of just gauge it based on how much time has elapsed, whether or not I want to go into another creature. So, that being said, let us start off with the Aarakocra. So, Aarakocra was the first broken race. And by that, I mean when the Aarakocra were first introduced, which I believe they were introduced in the Elemental Evil Player's Companion. When that released, I was actually a part of the D&D Adventures League. I think I might have been a local coordinator at that point, though I'm not 100% certain. Anyway, when this came out, it caused huge issues with the Adventures League specifically, because they didn't like player characters having the ability to fly at level 1, which a lot of people will claim is massively broken, and I'll explain why it's not when we go into this specifically. But it turned into one of the first instances of the Adventures League kind of making up their own rules as far as how things would work. And they basically said, yes, you can be an Aarakocra, but you don't get the flying speed, which kind of significantly handicapped the race itself. Again, the player's handbook in the early races were not... most of the racial features and the things like that were not things that were like super overpowered or broken or anything like that, and a lot of people just didn't use them. Like I mentioned in my review video, like Dragonborn very rarely, if ever, actually used their dragon breath, because there was always something more useful that they could do with it. But flight was a really useful thing about being an Aarakocra, and the rest of the class was balanced around, or the race was balanced around that. And taking that away was just, it really hurt, to the point where I don't think I remember ever seeing an Aarakocra at any of the tables I ran. And I ran Adventures League tables through, I want to say season 5 or 6, maybe even, no, I think all the way up to season 7, because 8 was when I finally could quit. So yeah, it's a big deal. And if you are if you're a dungeon master, or if you're a player, and you just don't want to, be that guy, it can feel really weird about asking to play a race that has a flying speed, because a lot of people will say, well, flying speed is massively, massively broken. And it isn't, because of the certain things that they made to this kind of adjusted version of it. The earlier version was a little bit more, was not quite as balanced well as this one is. So let's actually dive into the race itself. So Aarakocra, humanoid, size medium, walking speed is 30 feet. That's going to be pretty universal with all of these. They're all going to be medium size. I think most of them are going to have a speed of around 35 feet, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but that's your kind of standard. The creature type changes from thing to thing, but most of these races are humanoid. Some of them are humanoid and something else, and I think maybe one or two are not humanoid at all. But creature type really only matters with a few abilities and the things like that. Like there's a couple spells that affect only humanoids and things like that, so it's not that big a deal. However, the broken part, flight. Because of your wings, you have a flying speed equal to your walking speed. You can't use this flying speed if you're wearing medium or heavy armor. So that's the broken thing. Now, the original version of this, I believe, and I'm going off of memory here, which I don't have to because I can actually look it up. It's not there. Not there. Not there. Not there. Not there. Don't need you. Yeah, Elemental Evils. Okay, so the legacy version of them. And again, one of the things I really, really like about the Elemental Evil Player's Companion, and I will mention this for forever. The description of the Aarakocra is 2 very small paragraphs in Monsters of the Multiverse. In the Elemental Evils Player Companion, which was free, it is multiple pages of amazing, amazing stuff, and a sidebar specifically for how they fit into the Forgotten Realms. It was great. They had names, but eventually we get to the traits. And yeah, the original one was you have a flying speed of 50 feet, and you use this speed, you can't be wearing medium or heavy armor. But their base walking speed was 25 feet. So the change that they made is their flying speed is now equal to their walking speed. And this is the thing that a lot of people don't understand about the Aarakocra. Because of what is specifically stated here, it says you have a flying speed equal to your walking speed. That's it. Now, let's look at what flying says. Flying creatures enjoy many benefits of mobility, but they also must deal with the danger of falling. If a flying creature is knocked prone, has its speed reduced to 0, or is otherwise deprived of the ability to move, the creature falls, unless it has the ability to hover or it is being held aloft by magic, such as by the fly spell. So with that means any ability that can knock a target prone, and there's tons of them. Prone is a remarkably useful condition to inflict. Anything that knocks you prone will knock an Aarakocra out of the sky, and they will hit the ground hard. Anything that reduces their speed to 0, like being grappled, which there are a lot of different ways to get grappled, will cause them to instantly fall, because they do not have anything in here that allows them to hover. So this is the balancing aspect of the Aarakocra's flight, and it has always been this way. Just people didn't want to figure out how flying worked. So for an Aarakocra to not feel overpowered, because we're going to talk about the really cool things that you can do with a flying speed right at level 1 in a second here. But in order for them to not feel overpowered, your DM has to understand what the limitations of flying are. Like I said, the big limitation is unless you have the ability to hover, you always have the chance of falling down. And falling damage gets bad real quick. If you're only 10 feet off the ground, which you're never going to be if you're flying, you're always going to be 15 to 20, just to ensure melee creatures can't reach you. But even if you're only 10 feet off the ground, that's a d6 of bludgeoning damage. The higher up you go, the more fall damage you take. And just because you're high in the sky doesn't mean that there aren't abilities that can reduce your speed to 0. There's quite a few of them. And like I said, there's quite a few monsters that have the ability to knock targets prone from range. So, those are the things that you have to worry about. Now, if flying speed is really, really useful. And the kind of really, really common things to see players use a flying speed, probably the most common, is the flying wizard turret, which is effectively a wizard with the ability to fly, can go up, 40, 50, 60 feet, and then hurl fireballs and stuff like that. And the only people that can hit them are people hitting them with ranged attacks, which they can have other things that can make it more difficult for ranged attacks to hit them in the air. So obviously an Aarakocra wizard or sorcerer could be really, really cool. And with how they changed how racial attribute bonuses work, now you don't have to worry. Like the original Aarakocra got a bonus in dexterity and wisdom. They added 2 to their dexterity, 1 to their wisdom. So they could make really, really good rangers. They could make good monks. They could make good rogues. You could build them to be kind of an interesting cleric, but they weren't really set up to be most of the dangerous casters, because the damaging casters are all intelligence or charisma based casters. So now that you don't have to do that, you can make an Aarakocra wizard or an Aarakocra sorcerer, and that can be really, really useful. One thing, the downside of that is if something knocks you out of the air, which again, there's lots of different ways to do that, concentration spells become even more of an issue, because any damage you take forces you to make a concentration check. If you fall and take bludgeoning damage if you take falling damage, you have to make another concentration check. So a single attack could force you to make 2 concentration checks if you lived through it. The other kind of limiting factor of you can't use the flying speed if you're wearing medium or heavy armor generally doesn't tend to be a big thing. There are not a whole lot of classes that wear medium armor. There are a lot that have proficiency in medium armor, but 9 times out of 10, the limitations of medium armor or the benefits of medium armor, which is generally only like 1 AC higher than the light armor equivalents. The benefits of medium armor never really outweigh the detriments, which are you can only add a certain amount of your dexterity score to your armor class. Some of them will give you disadvantage on stealth checks. I don't see a ton of characters wearing medium armor ever. Either it's light armor or no armor, or heavy armor. I can count on one hand the number of characters I saw in the Adventurers League that used medium armor. And you generally have to kind of build around a character to use medium armor. The heavy armor, yeah. So you can't be a flying paladin. However, again, I don't really see that being that big a deal. Just because, well, I guess generally, if you're going to be strength based, you're not going to be using ranged attacks. Dexterity-based creatures, which are creatures that characters are generally going to be using your light armor, are going to get a significantly bigger benefit out of flight than someone wearing heavy armor. So, anyways, yeah, you can do that. You can also do flying ranger, flying rogue can be interesting. Especially when you factor in the ability to disengage as your bonus action as a rogue. That means Even if you get into a sticky situation, uh, even if you're surrounded, an Aarakocra rogue can literally just fly straight up into the air after disengaging and have no bad things happen to them. They can definitely get that kind of benefit of the hit and run tactics. The mobility feat is another one that could be really, really useful with flying, because you can literally fly in, make an attack, and then fly out and not have to worry about them being able to come back and attack you. So Aarakocra monks can be another one that could be really, really fun to play. And that'll actually go into the next ability they get as well. So yeah, flight. There's just a ton of different things that you can do with it. Understand the limitations, because the worst thing in the world is for you to kind of build this character around, just the flight aspect and not understand that you can be taken out of the sky super, super quick. Or there can be situations where flying just isn't possible. If you're in a dungeon delve, or you're inside, you're probably not going to be flying that much, because the ceilings are only 10 feet high. You can't really get enough lift to fly in there. So there are limitations to flight that you should be aware of if you try to build your entire character around this idea that you're going to be, the flying wizard to deter it. It literally is just going to take your DM putting you in a dungeon delve for you to have a useless character and feel really, really dumb. So moving on, the next thing that they get is called talons. Basically, your unarmed strikes are different than other classes' unarmed strikes, and this is another thing that I think a lot of people kind of undervalue. Before the Aarakocra had, I think they still had talons, but it was a D4 plus your strength modifier instead of the bludgeoning damage for normal unarmed strike. Now they change it to a D6 plus your strength modifier slashing damage instead of bludgeoning. And this really is a big deal, because normally to get to the point where you could create kind of a brawler style character, you would have to take at least one feat to be able to do that, or a fighting style. The optional class features there. So there was an unarmed fighting style that you could take as a fighter, where your unarmed strikes can deal bludgeoning damage equal to a d6 plus your strength modifier. And it can get even higher. But that requires you either taking a feat to get a fighting style, or having at least one level of fighter, because again, fighters get their fighting style choice right at first level. So that can be a little bit limiting. However, if you wanted to create like maybe a barbarian, a punchy barbarian, again, either you have to multi-class or take a feat or something like that, or you can use, because there's actually a couple different races that give you a different type of unarmed strike. And by taking an Aarakocra, you can now create a punching barbarian, to give a nice example. Now, there are some downsides to that. Again, barbarians are crit monsters, so using something big and two-handed tends to be really, really beneficial to a barbarian. But it is by no means absolutely necessary, and depending on how you build your barbarian, you can create some kind of interesting builds that allows you to be kind of a punching barbarian. Now, you cannot quote unquote dual wield or use two weapon fighting with unarmed attacks. That is still something that is exclusive to the monk. But again, it's something that monks get at first level. And any of these new races that give you a different kind of unarmed strike, you can use. You can take a single level of monk, and then use the martial arts feature specifically states that you can use your dexterity for them, and you can use the martial art die, but it doesn't say you have to. Nothing in it says that you have to use your dexterity. So literally taking a single level of monk to get martial arts, and then going barbarian or fighter or something, could mean that you could make a strength-based punching style of a fighter that plays extremely differently than anything you could ever get from a martial art or from a monk. And it would give you the ability to still get the kind of advantage of using, a quote unquote one-handed weapon, but by getting the two-weapon fighting effectively. So yeah, lots of different things, and then always, the Tasha's damage things. Because this does slashing damage instead of bludgeoning damage. It means that you can use those feats to do some really cool things. So that's Talons. Finally, the last thing that this race gets is called Wind Caller. Starting at 3rd level, you can cast the Gust of Wind spell with this trait without requiring material components. Once you cast a spell with this trait, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. So this is a one and done ability. Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma is your spellcasting ability for it when you cast Gust of Wind, chosen when you select this race. So one of the 3 kind of spellcasting abilities is going to need to be decent if you want to do this. But what is Gust of Wind? Basically, it's a concentration spell. It lasts for a minute. It takes a casting time of 1 action. And a line of strong wind, 60 feet long and 10 feet wide, blasts from you in a direction you choose for the spell's duration. Each creature that starts its turn in that line must succeed on a strength save or be pushed 15 feet away from you in a direction following the line. Any creature in the line must spend 2 feet of movement for every 1 foot it moves when moving closer to you. And then there's other stuff about gas and stuff like this. And then as a bonus action on each of your turns before the spell ends, you can change the direction. So basically, this is airbending. Basically, this is, you create this kind of tunnel where any creature in that tunnel gets blown back 15 feet. And if they try to get close to you, basically has that area difficult terrain. So again, for a ranged base class, a ranger, a shooty rogue, any kind of spellcaster, this Gust of Wind can be kind of a game changer, especially if you have other people on your team that can make it so that the only way enemies can get to you is to go through this conduit of wind. There's a lot of different things you can do with the ability to kind of control this. The other thing that's nice is it exudes from you. So that means if you move, so does this. And as long as you're moving, it stays in the same direction from you. You have to use a bonus action to kind of switch the direction. But that also means you can use this to kind of control the battlefield. This is a control type ability. They also mentioned you can cast the spell using any spell slot you have of 2nd level or higher. That is one thing that kind of has to be emphasized, because there are certain abilities that give you the ability to cast a spell, but that is the only way you can cast that spell. You don't learn the spell, you just have the ability to cast it once per day. And then if you wanted to use your spell slots to do it, you'd have to actually learn that spell, which kind of removes the usefulness of whatever ability gave you the ability to cast that spell. So this one does work both ways. And again, combine that with your talons and flight and everything. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this to create kind of a very, very interesting control style character. Being able to fly means you can get to the exact place you want to make sure that the people are going exactly direction you want. Your talons, again, it means you can get up close and personal, punch, 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 punch. And then as soon as their turn starts, they get blown away 15 feet and have to spend double their movement to get back to you. So literally, all you would really need to do is go up, punch, 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 get 5 feet away from them because your average creature is going to have 30 feet of movement, and blow them away. And then they can't get back to you to make an attack as long as they can't get around your kind of corridor of wind. So lots of really cool things you can do. And these are things that are useful from level 1 all the way up to level 20. And those are the things that I like about this. So yeah, moving on. We spent a lot of time on the Aarakocra. The Aasimar. I'm just going to real quick go back to... Come on. Aasimar was in Volos. There we go. I like to be able to compare the stuff with what they had before. So, Aasimar. Aasimar, if I remember correctly, I may be wrong on this, I believe Aasimar showed up in 3rd edition. They might have shown up in 2nd edition, at least as a playable race. I think they might have existed before them. But Aasimar are effectively, if you think of tieflings as basically half devils, Aasimar are half angels, effectively. Obviously, it's a little bit more convoluted than that because D&D can never be that simple. But that's basically what you're doing with this, is you are part angel, which is a really cool thing from a lore perspective. I like the idea of a half angel style character. And when you look at how they used to be with these sub races, they are really, really interesting from a story perspective. And they actually have some really, really useful abilities. But generally, I don't tend to see too many quote unquote min-maxers picking the Aasimar, at least the old version of it, for their traits. Again, traits just really weren't that useful up until this book. In Fizban's Treasury of Dragons kind of did something similar with the Dragonborn, where it made them just significantly more useful. Generally, people that were choosing Aasimar were going to be choosing it because of the lore behind it. Like, it's cool to be a half angel, and kind of have that idea of I'm going to, I'm related to some sort of deific figure. Maybe not an actual deity, but my parents are angels, or things like that. You see it all the time in anime, and I think it's a cool idea. So the actual traits. Creature type humanoid, size medium or small. Something that's not talked about a ton is the idea of the difference between a medium and a small creature as far as like mechanics. The big thing with a small creatures can generally get into spots that medium creatures can't. So that's a benefit. A place where a medium creature would normally have to... I can't remember what the term is. It's on Bugbears. I can look there. Squeeze. That's what it's called. Squeeze. I can't remember. I can't believe I couldn't remember squeeze. So that's a benefit to being small. And again, just being small in general can be kind of fun. However, there are some rather large detriments to being small. Things like two-handed weapons you can't use. You can't use without being at disadvantage when you roll them because they're just too big. Or like versatile weapons, you have to use the versatile version of it. You can't use it one-handed. Things like that a lot of people don't think about. So, swings and roundabouts. Walking speed is 30 feet. And here's where we start getting into the different stuff. First, they have celestial resistance. You have resistance to necrotic damage and radiant damage. Whereas... No, actually, that's the exact same thing as the legacy version of them. I totally didn't know that. So starting off, you get resistance to 2 damage types. Radiant damage is not something that a lot of creatures tend to use. Necrotic damage happens all the time. There are tons of if you're fighting undead ever, you will get hit with necrotic damage like every single time. So having resistance to necrotic damage is really useful. Radiant damage is useful in certain situations, but necrotic damage tends to be a significantly more useful. They do get dark vision, which is a hit or miss thing. For this particular subclass, it's almost a moot point, other than for the stealth aspect for this race. I mean, other than the stealth aspect for it, because one of the other things they get is called Light Bearer, which is the light cantrip. Charisma is your spellcasting ability for it. So this is one of the few times where they don't give you kind of a choice of, well, what do you want to cast it with? They just say charisma is your spellcasting ability for it. However, the light cantrip, the only time it matters for the light cantrip, what your spellcasting ability is if you target an object held or worn by a hostile creature, the target must succeed on a dexterity saving throw to avoid the spell. So if you were to try and target an object that was held, like if you wanted to cast a light spell on like a cloaker that had a necklace or something. They don't wear necklaces, but to give you an example, the cloaker could make a dex save to have avoided. The reason that's a big deal is because cloakers have a bunch of bad things happen when they're in bright light, and the light spell creates bright light. So if they have a light spell cast on something that is attached to them, they have disadvantage on their attack rolls. They can't use a lot of their abilities. Like, it's a really, really big deal. But other than that, it doesn't actually matter. And it's so rare that you're ever going to use the light cantrip that way, that it's so rare. So a lot of times the kind of way to deal with the fact that a race doesn't have dark vision is they can use a torch, or they can use the light cantrip or something. The Aasimar can go both ways. They can be in a party full of dark vision people and just not need it, or they can use the light cantrip and give it, like if there's humans in the party, they can actually use that so that everyone can see. The first kind of change that we did deal with for the Aasimar is in the Healing Hands ability. Healing Hands is kind of an interesting thing. It feels very similar to kind of a lesser version of the Paladin's Lay on Hands. The big difference being the Paladin gets a pool of hit points they can just give out, whereas the Aasimar has a one and done ability that allows a creature to regain hit points if you touch them. The old version, they regained a number of hit points equal to your level, which really wasn't useful. Even at level 20 hit point. Well, I guess 20 hit points is kind of useful at level 20, but most of the rest of the time, it's not. And even then, that is less than a single attack. At 20th level, that is less than a single attack of hit points that you're getting someone. So it's really only ever useful to bring someone out of unconsciousness. The old version. The new version, you can touch a creature and roll a number of d4s equal to your proficiency bonus. So it starts off more powerful and stays more powerful for most of the lifespan of it. When you get up to actually for the entire time, because 6 times 4 is 24. So you have a maximum of 24 hit points that you can restore at level 20. The difference being there's that rolling aspect to it. So you may do a little bit less. For most of the time, like for levels 1 to 4, you're going to be doing more healing with this version than the other one, because The other one you do 1 hit point, then 2 hit points, then 3 hit points. The lowest you can roll on 2d4 is 2. And you're very rarely going to roll 2. You're generally going to roll anywhere between a 3 and a 5 on 2d4. So, yeah, I mean, Helping Hands is significantly more useful. It's still a one and done ability, but the reason this didn't turn into a lot of the other abilities that they have in here, where they tie it to your proficiency bonus for a number of times, is because this isn't the only thing that Aasimars get. Again, moving on. Well, I guess, so Healing Hands is exactly what it sounds like. I do want to do some mentions. And I guess there's a lot of different uses for this. You can use it as a self-heal, kind of very similar to how like fighters have a self-heal. The big issue is going to be, it's going to be an action to do it. Again, there's a lot of situations where using your action to regain hit points is still going to be more beneficial than some of the other things you can do in certain situations, but it's never going to be always the right thing to do. And again, increasing it to D4s instead of just how much your hit points equal to your level just means that it's going to actually be useful instead of, oh look, you're not dying anymore. So yeah. Moving on, the final ability you get is called Celestial Revelation, Revelation. And this is basically how they got rid of sub-races in this. The old version, there were 3 different flavors of Aasimar. You had the Fallen Aasimar, the Protector Aasimar, and the Scourge Aasimar. And each one actually had a kind of lore thing behind them. So the Fallen Aasimar is basically just evil Aasimar. So an Aasimar who is touched by dark powers as a youth, or who turns to evil in early adulthood, can become one of the Fallen, a group of Aasimar whose inner light has been replaced by shadow. So these are the Sith. Protector Aasimar are specifically designed to these are the quote unquote good ones. And then the Scourge Aasimar are kind of like the Avenger version of an Aasimar, where they were their special ability basically gave them the ability to do a little bit of extra damage, and they turned into kind of a really cool thing. When we look at what we have here, and again, they were all very, very kind of lore based. Here, you when you reach 3rd level, choose one of the revelation options below. Thereafter, you can use a bonus action to unleash the celestial energy within yourself, gaining the benefits of that revelation. Your transformation lasts for a minute, or until you end as a bonus action. And once you use it, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. So the Aasimar has multiple one and done abilities. And again, the issue I have with one and done abilities is that players won't use them. But with it being tied to your race, and with just how useful these things are, these are powerful enough that they don't feel horrible being a one and done ability. And again, this isn't a class feature that you got as part of a level up or something. This is just part of your basic race feature. And so I've seen a lot of people just don't tend to treat them as carefully, simply because it isn't something you earned. This is just something you were born with. So the 3 different versions. You have Celestial Revelation, Necrotic Shroud, Radiant Consumption, or Radiant Soul. So Necrotic Shroud is basically the Fallen Aasimar ability from before. Flightless rings sprout from your back. Creatures other than your allies within 10 feet of you must succeed in a save or be frightened until the end of your next turn, and then until the transformation ends, once on each of your turns, you can deal extra necrotic damage to one target. When you deal damage to it with an attack or a spell, the extra damage equals your proficiency bonus. If you look at the other one, it was again extra damage equals your levels. So in this particular instance, Necrotic Shout will start off more powerful than the previous version of it, especially since this is a one and this is a one time per turn thing. So you'll kind of be flirting with which one is more useful as you're leveling up. As you get to higher levels, the old version was technically going to do more damage. Yeah, I mean, overall, Necrotic Shroud is not a game-breaking thing. I would much prefer it give you a die instead of a flat number, because, again, flat numbers aren't affected by crits. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty simple. And, again, the Frighten condition is very, very useful in a lot of situations. So they kind of balance out the idea that you can frighten literally everybody within 10 feet of you for effectively 2 turns, which again, combat in 5th edition D&D generally lasts between 4 and 6 turns. So that could be half of combat. These creatures are afraid of you, which gives you a lot of benefits. Radiant Consumption is effectively what the Scourge one was. You shed some lights. And at the end of each of your turns, each creature within 10 feet of you takes radiant damage. You get your proficiency bonus. And then once on each of your turns, you can deal extra radiant damage to one target. When you deal damage to it with an attack or spell, damage equals your proficiency bonus. So this one kind of gets to double dip. The difference being with radiant consumption, and again, this was the old Scourge version. And the old Scourge version was radiant damage equal to half your level, so proficiency bonus is just going to be better in general. And then the extra damage was your level. So the kind of limiting factor of the radiant consumption is going to be, well, the area damage, the stuff that happens at the end of your turn, is every creature within 10 feet. So that can hurt your allies. The other extra damage is just whenever you attack. So you're generally not going to be attacking your allies. So that's something that you need to kind of be wary of. But still something is very, very useful, especially if you can find ways to kind of double dip the damage. That turns into a definite kind of much more damage versus thing. The other thing that's nice about this is because it is technically 2 different sources of damage, that does mean that for things like concentration checks, if you hit someone concentrating on a spell, the first time they're going to take damage from your attack, they have to do a concentration check. At the end of your turn, when they take more damage from the consumption, that's another concentration check. So remember to use those things effectively. And then Radiant Soul, you get Spectral Wings, you get Flying, and once on each of your turns, you can deal extra radiant damage equal to your proficiency bonus. So each one of these gives you that extra damage equal to your proficiency bonus. It's just the other things you want. Do you want area damage? Do you want the ability to inflict the Frighten condition? Or do you want to be able to fly for a minute? All of them have uses in a lot of different situations. All of them are going to be useful with a lot of different classes. Again, flying speed, we've already talked about the things that can do that. Radiant consumption, for a class that's designed, something like a barbarian with radiant consumption could do some incredible things, because I've mentioned before, reckless attack is meant to make you look like a more advantageous target. So using reckless attack to get enemies to come near you, then activating radiant consumption, so now you're doing all this additional damage to anyone nearby you, and you're still barbarianing, could be a really, really interesting thing. Necrotic Shroud, being able to make everyone frightened from you, is a total barbarian style thing. Again, there's a lot of different ways that you could use these into to create some pretty interesting situations. So yeah, overall, I don't think this is I don't think this is necessarily better than the old version of the Aasimar. Because again, there's some situations where the old version actually had some benefits. Generally, when you're getting to higher levels, the old version of the Aasimar tended to do a little bit more. But since most of D&D tends to be played between, like level 1 to level about 12 is generally where some like 80 or 90% of D&D is played in that area. The high level stuff you're very rarely going to get a benefit from, but the fact that they kind of heavy load the lower ended stuff means that this can be something. And again, it's stuff that's useful from level 1 all the way up to level 20. Being able to inflict the frightened condition is still useful at level 20. Extra damage is still useful at level 20. All these other things are still useful, whereas the old versions, a lot of times, they just weren't really that useful once you got to the higher levels, with a few rare exceptions. So yeah, due to the fact that this is now, pushing, 46 minutes, we're going to cover those two races today. So that is going to be all for me today. As always, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important to other people seeing this video. In the comments down below, what are your thoughts on the Aarakocra and Aasimar? Do you like the changes that were made? Do you think they kind of limited the races? Like this is a way to kind of generalize everything and make everything just kind of a little bit too similar, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. All right, bye.